My name is Miguel Mata, first-generation American, retired military veteran, and now full-time college student. In my lifetime, I've come to meet people from all walks of life, from every corner of the country and most parts of the world, and what I can tell you is, everyone has a story. On this channel, I plan to share those stories with you and prove that despite the differences that make each of us who we are as individuals, fundamentally, we are all the same. I believe through the common thread of overcoming challenges, caring for our loved ones, and helping our communities, the rest of us will realize that our world is actually much brighter than some would make us think. And now, to shed more light, This Way Out. Hello, welcome back to This Way Out. It is I, once again, Miguel Mata, here sharing to share some time with me, a very special individual. I'm going to attempt to say his name in the proper way. Mm-hmm. And if I butcher it up, I do apologize. But I'm here today with Marek Rudak.
Oh, beautiful.
I know, for those at home watching this, you didn't see, I actually practiced that a few times and I nailed it.
Yeah, great job.
Marek, that is a what did you say? What's the nationality? Where's that from?
It's Polish. So basically Marek is a Polish mark.
Polish. Mm-hmm. Interesting. I think it's really cool because I think it's an interesting angle behind your story, given your service in the military. Started your origins being from Poland, but serving in the United States military. I thought that was interesting, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit.
Sure.
But
sure.
Marek, I really appreciate you getting in touch with me and spending a little time with me. As you know, this project is about just positive messages. Sharing stories about people who are doing things for their communities and things of that sort. Like I always share with people, the mission of this project is to share with people that might have difficulty seeing the world in a good light, in a kind of in a negative fashion. That there's actually a lot of light and good people around here, and you're one of those people, thankfully. And Marek, where are you located at right now?
So right now I live just south of Houston in a suburb called Friendswood. It's a very, very nice place, very beautiful community, beautiful houses, pretty well planned, and just a pleasure to live over here.
Excellent. I'm going to do things a little bit different in in this interview with you. I have a tendency to ramble, and just keep talking and talking and talking. What I'm going to do here a little different is we're going to kind of start with what your project is. You have a certain project that you have going on right now that I think is pretty cool. And I was just hoping you could share a little bit about that with us.
Sure, my pleasure. So my main project is I help Christian men grow from divorce and start their next chapter. And this really goes back to my own personal testimony, where I felt like I did all the right things, checked off all the right boxes. For example, I went to West Point, graduated top 10% of my class, fought in Iraq, fought in Afghanistan. And at the time, I actually had a really great job at ExxonMobil, but my marriage, it was just falling apart right in front of my eyes. I didn't know, or I felt like I couldn't do anything about it. And the worst thing about it is that if I didn't know how to fix it, then I was concerned who would ever find me lovable, because even if I found another woman that I love, that's how I felt about my ex-wife, then who's to say that the same thing's not going to happen? And in fact, that's exactly what happened. I developed this baggage because I didn't really understand what happened. I felt powerless, but yet I had this good innate desire to be married again, because being married is a good desire. And so I did a lot of online dating, but unfortunately, all of those attempts, as good as they were, they ended up in heartache. Whether I dumped the person or the person dumped me, just like this wound just kept opening right open, and it's brought me back to my divorce. And especially as a Christian, was very difficult because It made me wonder, is like, hey, am I not praying enough? Am I not going to church enough? That has God cursed me? And so all these questions came up, and it took me a long time to realize this. But as painful as divorce is, and it is very painful, it can also be a wonderful teacher. And that's why I decided to walk alongside of men who went through divorce to help them understand why it happened, because there were definitely things they've done, like I did, that contribute to divorce. And the beautiful thing about it is that once you understand these things and you change them, it gives you a lot of power, and that sets you up for the best chapters of your life, whatever it may be in that person's case.
One question that I shared with you in our conversation before this interview was that there I was curious, like, what the calling was to help men
Mhm.
for you, what that calling was exactly, because I know that divorce, the trauma, the
Yeah.
damage, the all the bad stuff that comes about, it's not just men who experience
Mhm.
these issues, following a divorce.
Yeah.
What was that? What was that calling toward men for you? Where did that come from?
Sure. So really, at the core of it is the fact that we, on average, and obviously there are exceptions, but on average, we men are taught to be very strong, and especially since both of us served in the military, we always expect to have the answers. And a lot of the times, or most of the time, pretty much all the time, it feels to us asking for help is weakness, and we don't want to appear weak. And while the divorce is just a stuff on women, what I found personally is that men tend to recover. Uh, the recovery for them is a lot slower and more painful, because on average, and again on average, women are a lot better about reaching out for help, whereas men
Right,
tend to stuff things down. The problem is, like, the more you stuff it down, it's almost like creating a bomb. You just kind of,
right, yeah,
and all it takes is just a fuse, and it blows
right,
up. And the
right,
problem is that if you keep doing that over and over again, you develop this mindset of, hey, this is as good as it gets. I'm no good. I'm damaged goods. And but then at the same time, you still have that desire to be with another person. You keep, it's one of those things that you keep searching, but every time you find it, it destroys, and then you keep going out, and it's a vicious cycle
right.
that not only affects your ability to form relationships, but it actually affects all the areas of your life, because if you don't have that support, if you don't have that person in your life, it's a lot harder for you to excel professionally and with your friends, because you don't have that anchor of a close, intimate relationship
Right,
to relate to.
right. It's complicated, so to speak, by the and I still couldn't find the right word to use here, but there's like this social, societal, like, box we kind of live in, where to be a man,
Hmm.
to be masculine
Yeah.
means to not express your emotions, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's the dealing with
Hmm.
the divorce and whatnot. It's
Yeah.
complicated by that, by those,
Yeah.
what are those called? Those guidelines, those,
Yeah.
what is that?
Expectation.
What am I looking for here?
Expectation. And and the thing about it is that the goal is not to have men cry about their feelings and things like that. The goal is to use feelings as information.
Right,
Whereas before, it's like, I have this feeling that I don't like, I need to stuff it down. It's
right,
more like, hey, I have this feeling, what is this feeling telling me, and understanding
right.
what
Explore it. Right,
exactly. So that's
right,
kind of like one thing that like, not, I don't say struggle, but it's like one thing that it's a big part of my practice, is explaining to men that, hey, I'm not trying to turn you into some kind of a pansy or a sissy. I'm just
right,
helping you to use that emotion as an asset, as something that can help you better discern who you are, because
right,
when you do that, you make much better choices.
right, right. Well, what I was going to share just a little bit ago
Yeah.
was that just this subject kind of resonates with me
Mhm.
personally, not because, thankfully, I have not been through a divorce, but I have witnessed firsthand
Mhm.
um, friends, men
Mhm.
who have been through divorce, and watched them go to a place mentally,
Mhm.
that it's actually kind of scary. It's actually kind of scary, and it's really it's as a friend, it was difficult to watch. It was difficult to experience as a friend, because you try to be there, to be someone who they can talk to. You try to be someone who they can confide in, but the damage, the psychological damage is so severe that it's very, it's nearly impossible to explore those feelings with anyone, really, I think.
Yeah.
And so, I salute you, sir, for taking on this, taking this on, because it really is something that, just once again from personal experience, it really is something that, men, people in general, but men, in this case, could really use and learn from. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
I know you talked about it just a little bit, but this desire to help, where's that come from? Was there a moment that took place that, that, happened as a result of X, Y, or Z? Was there something that happened that specifically called you to this?
Yeah, so there definitely was, but the interesting thing was it wasn't just like one certain thing. It was just a kind of like a slow buildup. So I think that the best way to explain, and I talk much about it in my book, the Love-Driven Man. At the core of it, and I think a lot of men that are listening to it can relate to it. Typically something happens in our family life that wounds us. And so, for example, in my case, it was a very abusive grandfather. It wasn't like sexual abuse. I didn't get beat, but it was very emotional abuse. He was very critical, very critical. I mean, even to this day, I can remember the tightness in my chest at a mere look of his disapproval, because shortly after he would just go in these bursts of anger, and basically everyone in our household was walking on eggshells and trying to be as little present as possible to minimize an opportunity for him to blow up, and that's what really hurt my confidence. That was kind of the biggest wound that just kept compounding. And so, for example, but the interesting thing is that on the outside, you wouldn't have really seen it. So, as an example, even though I carried that wound within me, I got accepted to West Point. I graduated Ranger School. I was an infantry officer, but the reality of the situation is looking back and knowing what I know now, that even though I would have done military all over again, don't get me wrong, I would have done the same thing over again. But the driving cause between me putting on uniform is I felt like, hey, once I put that uniform, once I put on that Ranger tab on my thing, once I go to Jump Master School, then nobody's gonna question my manhood. Nobody's gonna question my confidence. And that was my way of trying to hide the fact that inside I was very broken and wounded. And I sought external validation instead of looking on the inside and fixing that confidence on the inside of me.
Right. How, to me, please excuse my ignorance here, but just kind of speaking from a perspective, kind of understanding, of somewhat understanding, but it's very interesting to me that those achievements that you accomplished, those graduating from West Point, first of all, becoming a ranger, becoming a paratrooper. We haven't mentioned this yet, but you were assigned to the 82nd Airborne, which is one of the most prestigious jump units to be assigned to. These are some significant accomplishments, but you still kind of felt rather insecure inside.
Yeah. I mean, I did. It's I mean, the best way I can explain it, it was really a form of facade, in a sense that I felt like, hey, once I graduate from West Point, nobody's gonna touch me, But it's a lie, and it's always something next. But then it's like, okay, no. Once I get to Ranger School, nobody's gonna be able to touch me. Once, it just keeps going. And the sad thing is that each time you get to it, it's a very disappointing experience, because all of a sudden it's got to be the next thing. And so for me, that kind of I left the military, got a great job, and so and that still wasn't it. So what's like the kind of next step? It's to get married. when I got married, but then the marriage blew up. And that was the, that was kind of like when all that the house of cards just fell over.
Right.
I realized that, hey, as great as the accomplishments were, and then they're great accomplishments, I'm very proud of them. I would have done the same thing all over again, don't get me wrong. But, all of those accomplishments, as great as they are, they cannot compensate for the pain and the wounds that you have inside of you. And eventually you're going to run out of accomplishments and something's going to break, and you're going to have to deal with what's on the inside to be able to heal from it.
So how do we do that? How do you teach that? If I don't want you to reveal too much of your book, because I'd really like to encourage people to buy your book, but what can you share with us that would offer some help in that respect?
Sure. So one of the kind of the simplest and most powerful exercises I do with my clients is when I first sign them up, is I help them to understand their values. Because here's the thing, if you ask an average person, they'll be able to list probably like 5 or 6 values that they, things that they're really passionate about, things that they care about. But as you probably know from Air Force, if everything is a priority, nothing's a priority, So what I try to do is I try to get my clients just down to 3 values. And that really gets you thinking, what is it that really is important to me? And so that's like the first thing, because it helps you to understand, like, what is it that gives me joy? But the real power of this exercise is that inevitably in one of those 3 values, one of those values is fear-based, And so let me give you an example. For example, I had this one client whose one of his values was loyalty. And at the surface of it's like loyalty, loyalty is a good thing, right? It's a good thing to be loyal. But once he shared with me the story behind this value, why this value is important, what we found is that loyalty was his way of keeping peace with his family, because when he wanted to be loyal to not to anger them, and then loyalty also carried into his work, where he did his job, but he felt like he couldn't leave his job because that's if he left his job, that would be disloyal. And so the problem, and that's why, even though loyalty is not a bad value, but in his case it was a fear-based value, because it kept him longer in bad relationships and bad workplace longer than he should have, because in his mind, if he left, then that would be disloyal.
Interesting. So a fear-based value. What other kind of values are there, would you say?
Sure. So that, I can give you another example, like another client I have, who, like, in this process, he realized that his value is actually freedom. And again, it's like it's the land of the free. What's the big deal? But here's what the big deal was: is that once he realized that freedom was his value, he realized that, for example, he was in the Air Force, and then later on he got a corporate job, and he did well. But it's like each time there was some kind of a conflict, and it just like he had a lot of great ideas, but he kept clashing with his boss. And and it's not like he got fired, but it just like it felt like he couldn't really move forward in his career. And so once you realize, in the context of freedom, you realize that, hey, the reason why I'm clashing is because I'm in the wrong setting, because I have all these great ideas, but in those settings, there's a cap on what you can implement. So he didn't have the freedom to do it, and so that caused him to actually quit his job and start his own business. And then 6 months later, I talked to him. He actually hired his first employee. He's doing that well. And so here's an example of something very, on surface, very simple and silly. But the thing is that a lot of times we take our experience at face value, and we never question them. And so somebody like me can help you look at it from objective standpoint and make you realize that all these things, like, for example, I have to be loyal. I have to, do what people tell me in every single situation. Once you start questioning these things and open my client's mind, it helps them realize that, hey, all of a sudden they see all these different possibilities. And once they start taking steps of faith towards those possibilities, they get more confidence, and they find ways to gain that confidence and be able to do the things that they were meant to do all along, but their mind, their past experiences held them back from.
So your job, or not, your job isn't necessarily to discredit where they've placed their priorities. It's just to explore them and to see if they are in fact genuine, would you say?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's I'm of an opinion that nothing is really a mistake. The only mistake is the one that you'll not learn from. And so all these experiences, like, for example, with the divorce, I've definitely made my mistakes. So it's not to say that, hey, what I've done doesn't have any value or I'm perfect, but it's just realizing, hey, this is what worked, this is what didn't, and let's make the changes. And because once you realize what didn't work and you make those changes, then you really step up and you're able to position yourself for much bigger opportunities instead of just doing this. Just kind of goes back to that quote by Einstein, where you're doing the same thing. Definition of insanity is doing the same thing all over again, expecting different results.
Yeah. Well, in this for my project,
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily push religion, but I don't restrict people from
Sure.
sharing their
Mhm.
faith, whatever it may be.
Yeah,
Your project is faith-based
sure.
in Christianity.
Mhm.
How do you tie that in
Yeah,
to how you teach and how you coach?
sure. So at the most basic level, we always pray at the beginning and the end. So there's always the inviting the Holy Spirit into everything that we do. And also, whenever we talk about situations, I always try to come up with biblical examples of different characters, how they would handle it, or how put the situation in the context of the Bible, and that really helps because a lot of times what happens, we tend to think that our lives are unique,
Mm-hmm.
and what's happening is very unique to us, and I'm not trying to discredit that, but when you put that experience into the context of the salvation story, it's a lot easier to see something bigger that's going to come out of that experience,
Right.
and then that helps the person to, in that context of suffering, to connect to the scripture, because we all know that Jesus had to suffer. Even as God, Jesus had to suffer. So there's a meaning behind the suffering, and one of the things that I found, as like, trust me, I don't want to suffer any more than I have to. But the fact of the matter is that every time I suffered, and I maintained my relationship with God, I always came up with a deeper understanding. And so that's like one entry point to a deep relationship with Christ, is seeking Christ in that relationship, in that difficult situation, and having established that connection gives you a deeper understanding, deeper connection with God, and helps you to come out stronger on the other side of whatever you're going through.
Your program, is it open to people who are not of a Christian faith?
Yes, definitely. I mean, the only reason, the only time I would turn somebody away is if they were totally against the Christianity, because at that point, it's not that it's that person's bad, but I'm sure there's other people that can service that person better.
Right.
And so to me, it's like, as long as you're open to it. But I'm not, so for example, I just to kind of give you a little more my programs. So in my program, there's 4 steps. The first step, I help my clients take great care of themselves, because again, when you go through divorce, there's a lot of times it's easy to fall into temptation because of the stress. Things like drinking, bad habits, pornography, you name it. And
Right.
those habits actually make the stress level even worse. So in that first step, I help my clients take great care of themselves to reduce that stress so they can be focused on making changes. And then the second step, I help my clients make peace with their past. Because what happens inevitably when you go through a divorce, there's a lot of resentful thoughts. Whatever the situation is, you might have resentful thoughts about your ex-spouse, you might have resentful thoughts about what you could have or should have done, maybe even wondering if God loves you. And so if you have these kind of thoughts that they hold you back, they bring you to the past. So I help my clients make peace with the past, so they have full mental capacity to move forward. And then step number 3 is I help them enjoy being single. And that's one thing that's very difficult for us divorced men. We tend to want to jump right into another relationship because we never really took the time to understand who we are as people. And so, because you kind of follow the checklist, and then you get married, and then like when you get divorced, that identity got ripped apart.
Yeah.
It's really hard to figure out who you are without being married. So there's this tendency to not being comfortable with being single, and trying to rush into relationships. So I help my clients understand this is a great opportunity and season to reinvent yourself and build a new life around you, around your identity that you quite frankly never really had the time to explore. And then the step number 4 is starting the next chapter. And so, and in that case, we figure out exactly what that next step is, because once you dealt with those negative thoughts, once you made peace with the past, once you enjoy being single, it's a lot easier to figure out what that next chapter is. And we identify what it is, whether that's a new relationship, whether that's new ministry, whether that even a new career, and then we take concrete steps of action. So inevitably, none of these are necessarily religion or Christianity based, but at each step, using Christianity and using prayer and using God can definitely make the transition a lot easier. And so again, it's not so much how good of a Christian you are. I just feel like if you're open to it, it's a good program for you. And if you open up your heart, because inevitably what happens when you go through divorce, you start looking for deeper meaning. It's a prime opportunity to look, what's my purpose? Why am I here? And inevitably, you're gonna look to some divine power. And so, to me, that's a great opportunity to minister to the person. And again, I meet the person where they are, just as long as they're comfortable with God. I'm open to helping them out.
Well, I'm feeling like really charged up right now because this is, not to sound too corny or whatever, but you're kind of radiating this good energy. You know what I mean? It's like, it really makes me feel good because, as I shared with you over the phone, they were my personal feelings which initiated starting this whole thing. And every time I find a new person who is dedicating themselves to helping others, I just feel that much better, because it's like there's good people out there. There are good things happening. They're just not as obvious as we would sometimes like for them to be. But something that I wanted to share with you, you said something just a little bit ago about how, sometimes we feel like our problems are unique. Yeah. That's another thing about this way out, is that what I'm trying to show people who might be having trouble is that the troubles that we experience, the problems that we experience, they are actually shared by more than one person. They're shared by a lot of people. And maybe you tried this tool, or you tried this technique, or you tried this, but maybe you didn't try this, and you get it from this way out. And my goal is to try to share as many ways and methods and tools and skills, to share as much of that stuff as possible, to be a resource for people who might have experienced X, Y, or Z. So anyway, I in all of that being said, I'm agreeing with you. I agree with you. We feel like our problems are unique to us, and we're the only ones that experience the problems that we experience. But the truth is that a lot of people experience your problem similarly, but they get through it differently. Yeah. And the more ways that we have at our fingertips and more exposure we have to the ways that we get out of it, the better off we are as a whole. That's my feeling. So, but I'm like totally charged and amped up by what you're doing, because I think it's awesome. I think it's awesome, and I appreciate you starting it, and I wish you all the best. I really do. Mr. Marek, you've got a book that's available on Amazon, I think. What's the name of your book?
Yeah, so it's the Love+driven Man, and it's really it's wrapped up around my testimony, and really what it comes down to is, just like as I mentioned with my grandfather, something happens in our past that wounds us, and what ends up happening is we end up controlling other people, controlling ourselves to make sure that we don't encounter that situation again. But by going through this book, that you have an opportunity to pick up stories, and there will be questions and journaling. And the whole idea behind this book goes kind of back to that sign, is that instead of making these control-based choices, it will help you to make love-based choices. And by doing these love-based choices, you will step out of the things that you believe are true, and you will step into things that are actually true. And so if you're a man, and actually some of my readers are actually women, some of the women readers have found it very helpful too, because much obviously it applies to them as well, but the things that don't, it helps women understand why some of men might have this difficult time with things like expressing love or communicating. And so this is a great valuable tool for men and women. It's primarily written for men, but also women would find it beneficial. So it's available on Amazon, the Love+Driven Men, and paperback or Kindle version.
Excellent. And also your project for the helping Christian men.
Yes. Right. So it's another website. It's called Marek, Marek, Rudak, Rudak.com. So it's my first name, last name.com, marekrudak.com. So if you're a man who wants to grow from divorce and start their next chapter, or you know somebody who does, please check it out. There's a opportunity there to sign up for a free consultation, and I'm sure you'll find value from our conversation. So please, if that's you or somebody you know, don't hesitate to reach out.
We're getting ready to conclude here, but before I conclude any interview, I like to give whoever I'm talking to the opportunity to say, what I like to say is, it doesn't have to be related to anything that we talked about or that you talked about just now. It doesn't have to be related to anything, but you have an audience and an opportunity, a time, you have the space. If there's a piece of advice that you would want to offer anyone who is listening, just anything, a nugget of information, what would that be?
I think it's kind of hard to give just one nugget without knowing what the particular person is going through. But I think it's safe to say that everybody is going through some kind of suffering at any given point. And what I would say, based on my experience, based on my scars, is seek out help. And however small that may look, it might be just talking to a friend, it might be joining a Facebook group, or it might be calling somebody like me if you're going through divorce and you need help starting the next chapter. But whatever it is, please reach out, because help is available. And there's a lot of people who are actually waiting for somebody to take the first step. And it's one of those things that if you don't take the first step, nobody takes the first step, and we stay disconnected, and we stay in that wrong belief that our situation unique is nobody understand that. So, whatever situation you're going through, I'm positive there's at least one person who can relate to you, and at least one person who can help you. And I highly, highly encourage you to take that step and reach out, make that phone call, write that email, whatever it may be. Because there are people who can help you, and don't get caught up in that lie that your suffering is unique and there's nothing you can do about it.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's I try to put that message out as much as possible. So it really makes me feel good that you're putting it out there too. So thank you for sharing that. I admire what you're doing, Marek. And I congratulate you on all your accomplishments. I don't know if anybody's told you, but I'm stupid proud of you, man. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Great job.
And thank you for doing this podcast. I've actually done some podcasting myself. It's actually a lot of work.
Yeah.
And it's definitely a skill. So thank you so much for welcoming people like me and sharing people's stories. Because the cool thing about podcasting is you never know whose life you touch, and it's really cool to I'm sure, I don't know if you haven't done it yet, but I'm sure at some point somebody's going to reach out and their life will be changed because of something you've done today, yesterday, or maybe even 10 years ago.
Well, thank you for being here, and I appreciate you sharing your time. If you like this episode and you want to see future episodes, make sure that you click like and subscribe. This episode will be available on YouTube. The full episode will be available on YouTube, but the audio excerpts will be available on the YouTube, on the This Way Out podcast. So be sure to tune in on This Way Out, on the This Way Out podcast. It's comes out on Mondays and Thursday mornings, available at 6 a.m. Try to keep that going, so that way you can listen to it during a commute or something like that. Mr. Marek Rudak shared with us some excellent information, shared his story, his accomplishments, the challenges that he overcome, and congratulate him for his accomplishments. And I thank you, Mr. Marek, for sharing your time. Make sure that you check me out on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook as well. All right. You guys take care. God bless.